Organisms and Population. The world is so vast with different habitats and organisms. Major biomes of India include tropical rainforest, deciduous forest, deserts, and seacoast. There are so much variations in each biome that lead to the formation of so much variety of habitats. There are some key elements that lead to so much variation in physical and chemical condition of different habitats. These include abiotic and biotic. Abiotic includes temperature, water, light, soil, etc. And biotic includes pathogens, parasites, predators, competitors. Temperature is one of the major factors that affect variation. In nature, habitats can range from extremely cold to extremely hot. Thus, organisms can be grouped into two groups such as euthermal and stenothermal. Those organisms that can tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperatures is known as euthermal, while those organisms that are restricted to a narrow range of temperature is known as stenothermal. Water is another important factor influencing the life of organisms. The salt concentration is less than 5 in inland water, 30 to 35 in the sea, and greater than 100 in some hypersaline lagoons. Thus, some organisms that are tolerant of a wide range of salinities are called euryhaline, but those which are restricted to a narrow range are known as stenohaline. Thus, many freshwater animals cannot live for long in seawater and vice versa, because of the osmotic problems they would face. Light. Plants produce food through photosynthesis. We all know that. It's a process which is only possible for plants only when sunlight is available as a source of energy. However, deep, which is almost more than 500 meters deep in oceans, the environment is so dark that the inhabitants are not even aware of the existence of a celestial source of energy called sun. Then what? But still, organisms thrive there. Soil. The nature and properties of soil in different places vary, and so does the organisms growing there. Characters of the soil like soil composition, grain, aggregation determines the percolation and water holding capacity of the soil. This, along with the topography, determine to a large extent the vegetation in an area. And the vegetation dictates the type of animal that can be supported. Similar is the case of aquatic environments where the sediment characteristics often determine the type of benthic animals that can thrive there. Responses to abiotic factors. Organisms that try and maintain the constancy of its internal environment. The process that the organisms use is called homeostasis. That is, homeostasis is nothing but the process by which organisms try to maintain their constancy in their internal environment despite having varying external environmental conditions. There are two groups of organisms, some that can maintain homeostasis and the others that do not. Now, the organisms that can maintain homeostasis by physiological or behavioral means, by ensuring constant body temperature, constant osmotic pressure, etc., are known as regulators. They are capable of maintaining an internal body temperature by thermoregulation, osmoregulation, etc. An example is of humans, of course. Now we maintain a body constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius both in summers and winters. In summers we sweat profoundly to maintain temperature, and in winter we have a reflex movement like shivers which produces heat in our body. But plants cannot maintain. They do not have such mechanisms to maintain the internal temperature. Now comes conformers. Most of the animals and nearly all the plants cannot maintain a constant internal temperature. Thus, they simply conform or conform. Thermoregulation. This is because thermoregulation is energetically very expensive for organisms, especially in case of small animals or small birds and small organisms. The surface area is greater than their volume. Hence, they have to spend a lot of energy to produce external heat. They also lose their body heat very fast when it is cold outside. Thus, they have to spend a lot of energy to generate more body heat through metabolism. This is the main reason why we do not see small animals in polar regions. Now, when both these regulation and conform is not available for organisms, there are two other alternatives for survival, which are migration and suspension. The organisms can move away temporarily from a location or stressful habitat to a more hospitable area and return when the stressful period is over. For example, in Keolado National Park, Bharatpur, Rajasthan, every winter it witnesses thousands of migratory birds from Siberia and other extremely cold northern regions. Another alternative is suspend. In bacteria, fungi, and lower plants, various kinds of thick-walled spores are formed which help them to strive unfavorable conditions. These germinate on availability of suitable environments. In higher plants, seeds and some other vegetative reproductive structures serve as a mean to tide over periods of stresses beside helping in dispersal. They do so by reducing the metabolic activity and going into a state of dormancy. Other examples in the animal kingdom include hibernation, estivation, and diapause. Hibernation is practiced by bears, and estivation by snails and small fishes. As they do estivation in order to avoid summer-related problems like heat and desiccation. Under unfavorable conditions, many zooplankton species in lakes and ponds are known to enter diapause. Diapause is nothing but a stage of suspended development. Apart from this, there are many adaptations that organisms use to overcome stressful habitat. Adaptation by definition is an attribute of the organisms. It might be morphological, physical, and behavioral that enables the organisms to strive and reproduce in its habitat. There are three kinds of adaptations: morphological, physiological, and behavioral. In morphological, some animals and plants in hot springs have various adaptations. An example of animals is kangaroo rat, which produce water by internal fat oxidation, and it concentrated urine to remove excretory products, so that minimal volume of water is lost. In case of desert plants, they have thick cuticle and sunken stomata. That is, the stomatas are arranged in deep pits to minimize water loss through transpiration. They also have special photosynthetic pathway called CAM or CAM pathway. An example of this pathway is snake plants. In plants like Opuntia, the leaves are reduced to spines and the photosynthesis is taken over by flattened stems. All these are a measure to reduce water loss. Yet another example, in cold regions, mammals have shorter limbs and ears. Now this is called Allen's rule. Due to shorter limbs and ears, they reduce heat loss. While in the polar seas, aquatic mammals like seals have a thick layer of fat under their skin called blubber that acts as an insulator and reduces loss of body heat. An example of physiological adaptation is the altitude sickness we face while we go to high altitude regions like mountains. There, due to the lack of oxygen, we feel nauseous, have fatigue, and heart palpitations. All these are due to lack of oxygen. In some course of time, we get used to that atmosphere, and eventually, altitude sickness vanishes. So, what does our body do as an adaptation? Our body increases the red blood cell production, decreases the binding affinity of hemoglobin, and increases the breathing rate. All this help in overcoming altitude sickness. Also, in case of animals and fishes that thrive in Antarctic water where the temperature is always below zero, and in marine invertebrates and fish that live at great depths in oceans, the pressure could be greater more than 100 times the normal atmospheric pressure that we experience. Organisms in such living extreme environments show a fascinating array of biochemical adaptation. It is from these chemicals or biochemicals that they adapt in their lives to overcome the stressful environment. There are yet another group of adaptations called behavioral adaptations, in which the organisms show some behavioral changes to overcome the stressful habitats. An example is of desert lizard, which bask in sun and absorb heat from the atmosphere when their body temperature is fairly constant. The desert lizards lack the physiological ability that mammals have to deal with the high temperature of their habitat. But they manage to keep their body temperature fairly constant by behavioral means. This is by they bask in the sun and absorb heat when the body temperature drops below the comfort zone. However, when the temperature starts increasing, they just move into shade and cool down their body. So the world is so vast, and there are so many organisms and so many varieties of organisms and so many varieties of ways in which they adapt to the environment. As we discussed earlier, some are regulators which can regulate their body temperature, and some are conformers which cannot regulate and hence conforms. Yet others are migrators, which just displace from one place to another place when stressful habitat is there. And some suspend, that is, for temporarily they stop their development or just go to a sleeping hibernation in winter in case of bears. Yet other is example of adaptations, that's the desert plants, animals used in hot regions, and the cold mammals and seals etc. used in colder climates. Or the adaptations we use in high altitude, like altitude sickness, or the biochemical adaptations, organism living under greater pressure use. Yet another is the behavioral adaptations that organisms use that bring about changes in their behaviors to adapt to that stressful environment. There is so much of variation in environment, in nature, yet there is that many adaptations that plants or organisms use to overcome the stressful habitat. How fascinating, right?